So there's this problem I've noticed in this online language learning space when it comes to actually speaking the language. And it's the fact that people are so obsessed with speaking the language. If you speak a language, then that is social proof and credibility that you are better than this other person who doesn't speak this many languages, you know? For example, this polyglot speaks 5 languages and this other one speaks 10 languages, and therefore he's perceived as having more authority on this subject to talk about languages, and you should probably trust him because he speaks more languages. So the whole idea is that the competence in this language is measured by how well you speak the language. So why is this a problem? Well, if you break it down, which is what I'm going to do, you will see that it doesn't make any sense, and yet society perceives this as completely normal, right? I'm sure you've been in a situation where you speak a language and people are like, wow, you are so good at languages, please, how do you do it? How do I learn a language? You are perceived as somebody who knows a lot because you speak more languages. So I'm going to share with you my thoughts in 3 parts based off of my experience, what I think, in my opinion, is language, like the nature of language, how we learn it, acquire it, because I believe that the way we define language and language learning right now is completely misunderstood. So first I want to show you this clip because this is actually what triggered my thoughts, which triggered the idea of making this video. So some context, I guess. I'm watching this guy who is watching another guy who's been doing comprehensible inputs, so listening to Spanish for 2,000 hours. So if you don't know what Dreaming Spanish is, it's basically a website where you can learn Spanish, but what you do is you just watch videos because it's input based, right? So the method is like you watch a lot of videos, you expose yourself to input that your brain can understand, comprehensible input. And if you do this for a certain amount of hours, you can see it right here, then you will be able to do certain things. I do like this channel, by the way, but he was reviewing this guy who has been doing Dreaming Spanish for 2,000 hours, okay? And he said something that caught my attention. So here's the clip.
I can wake up and order food and find a bathroom.
Oh God, he's saying after 2,000 hours, that's what he can do? Wake up, order food and go to the bathroom? You can literally do that within 30 hours of Pimsleur.
When you've done 2,000 hours, what you can do is this. You can literally do that with 30 hours of Pimsleur. There's something wrong with this, in my opinion. So let me explain. So in this video, Evil Dia, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, sorry. He seems surprised that this guy, after 2,000 hours of listening, is only able to do like these basic things, right? Like I wake up and I whatever he said. To me, it sounds completely normal. So let me explain why. Okay, so here's my problem, right? The goal of this method, ALG, or comprehensible input, I guess, is to acquire a language naturally, like 100% naturally. With ALG especially, it's trying to imitate the process that you go through as a baby, right? And so expose yourself to the language, make these connections, and basically form a second language brain, right? Right from the start, by providing comprehensible input. Now, this is not going to be 100% similar as when you're a baby, because, you know, you're not a baby when you're learning a second language, but it's imitating this process. Now, that's the goal. Now, personally, I was really skeptical of this approach when I first heard about it, because I've learned Japanese for I don't know how many years. I started in like 2018. So I've always been into learning grammar. Grammar is fascinating to me, but when I first heard this method, I was like, that cannot be possible. How can you learn something without learning your grammar, right? So I was skeptical, but also intrigued. So I tried it out, and I'm still trying it out right now. I'm doing ALG as well. I'm at 150 hours. I will make a video about that too. But it makes total sense to me. It makes total sense to me. So let me explain. In my opinion, you're not learning a language, or you shouldn't learn a language to be able to say X thing. Like, oh, you can say this, I will do this method because I can say that faster if I do it like in this, using this method. So basically what you're saying is, I'm learning this language so I can say that, so I can have this result of, you know, saying something faster. So that's why I'm using this method. But you're not learning the language to be able to say something. That's not a valid goal. Speaking as a goal doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Speaking should not be the goal. You should not say, I am learning this language because I want to say this in the language, or I want to say X. That doesn't work. Let me explain why. If that was the goal, then what you could simply do is remember whatever you want to say. Say I wanted to say, I really like doing X. Then I could just go online, translate that from Dutch, my native language, to, let's say, Japanese, remember that, and then, hey, I can say this phrase, right? So So I could just remember it, but that's not how language works. If language worked like that, then right now I would have to remember every single word that I'm saying, but I'm not. I mean, I do have a script, but you get the idea. I have something to say, a meaning, like a message with a meaning. I think of that and I just know how to say it. I know how to say it because, well, that's just how language works. I think of it and the speech just, it comes out, So like I said, the problem is when people are starting to learn a language and they say, hey, I want to know how to say this, they are going to remember how to say it. They're going to look it up, right? And the whole point of this natural learning, ALG, is to not look things up. You just expose yourself to the language and your brain will make these connections. It will make a big language model with neural connections, and based off of those connections and this model, you will be able to say whatever you want to say. If you look something up actively and you're trying to remember it or whatever, that defeats the whole point of natural learning, right? And so you have a problem here. So if you want to say something and therefore, let's say you look it up or you learn it or you remember it or whatever, that's not natural learning. But if you want to do it the natural way, you want to acquire it, then there's a problem, because let's take that same phrase or whatever you want to say. The chances that you are going to be exposed to that specific phrase in a natural environment, being exposed to the language, those chances are just very slim. That's probably not going to happen very soon for like thousands of hours. And so you kind of have to just trust this process that you are going to expose yourself to the language, and at some point you will hear this word or whatever and you can use it. You cannot choose what you want to learn. That's the problem. And so if we come back to what this guy is saying, like I can say some simple stuff like, wait, what did he say again? Order food and find a bathroom, for example. I don't know how to say simple stuff in Japanese, and like I said, I think this is normal, and I just explained why that is. The chances of you encountering that language in a natural environment are just low. If you were to ask me how to make a reservation in Japanese, I wouldn't right now be able to do it, because I've never been exposed to a situation where I had to do that, or where I saw someone make a reservation for me to, absorb that language and acquire it and really internalize it and be like, oh, that's how he's making a reservation right now, I can probably do that as well. Now, here's the thing. If you look at the baby, right, this baby is exposed to the language 24/7. So his chances of encountering that specific piece of language, whatever that is, making a reservation or whatever, are just way higher. Now, I've never been exposed to these words like reservation or whatever, but I do think that because I have this whole foundation, years of input of Japanese and this whole language model in my brain with connections, if I were to encounter a situation like this, then it would probably be definitely be way easier for me to internalize that language. Whereas if you took someone who's been learning Japanese for like 1 month or something, yes, he can learn, or 30 hours, right? If he learned in those 30 hours how to make a reservation, yes, he can do that, but he's gonna have to rely mostly on remembering that, because there's no like language model yet in his brain. It's just pure remembering that he can rely on. He cannot rely on, he cannot truly internalize that piece of language. Now, also, if you look at a baby, and this is probably the most important thing, is that his goal is not to speak because, well, he can speak and he's not concerned with speaking. Now, for a baby, his circumstances are actually perfect because he is not expected to have conversations with people, and his goals are not to converse with people. So he doesn't want it himself, and he's not expected to. Alright, so baby don't really have the goal of speaking, so maybe we shouldn't either, right? But that doesn't work, because we chose to learn a second language. I chose to learn a second language, so if I didn't have a goal, then why am I even learning a second language, right? And this is my other problem. For some reason, we expect that with learning that language, we eventually learn to speak as well. And this is a problem, because learning a language and learning to speak are two different things. They're two different processes. Like, we expect to be able to speak the language as a result of learning, but that's the thing. Speaking does not necessarily come from learning. I mean, it could be, and it usually is if you're, for example, like learning naturally, but it doesn't have to be. Like I said, you can simply remember a phrase and then say it out loud. You're also speaking, but that's not as a result of like understanding. So they're two different skills, and they don't correspond with each other necessarily. So if you look at a skill, for example, driving a car, driving a motorbike in my case, because that's something I like to do, or dancing, for example, These are skills where you practice the same thing over and over again, and then you get better at those things, right? It's very simple. With languages, it's different, because first what you do is you build this model, right? You expose yourself to the language, your brain is building this second brain, this language learning, this language model in your brain with neural connections. After that comes speaking, if you want to practice that speaking. But that speaking comes from learning the language first, having an understanding of the language, having that model in your brain first. If you speak from the start without that whole model, then it's a different story, because then you can really only rely on remembering those phrases that you're speaking, which is I talked about that before, right? So let's say if I say a phrase in Japanese, for example, benkyou ni narimashita, right? A phrase that I know instinctively. I know how to say it, right? And that's a result of me learning Japanese, listening to Japanese for like 5+ years, 6, 7, whatever, a long time, right? And then there's person B, okay? Person B, he's been learning Japanese for a month, a week maybe. Now he also knows this phrase, benkyou ni narimashita, but not as a result of him learning for 5 years, no, because he simply learned the phrase. He saw it in a textbook, he remembered it. Both of us, person A and person B, can both say this phrase, right? Benkyou ni narimashita. But the thing is, nobody can tell the difference between our competence. Here's the thing. If I give you option A, which is learning via my route, which takes 5 years, or I give you option B, which only takes 1 month, which one would you choose? Well, 99% of people will always choose option B, because it is faster and it leads to the same results, right? But that's the thing, that's not necessarily true. You don't know. And the thing is, you cannot look in my brain or the other person's brain, so you cannot tell the difference. And most people will choose for whatever is faster and leads to the same result. That's just how it is. And so what this leads to is to people in this online polyglot language learning space, and they play the numbers game. They'll say, hey, I know 10 languages, I speak 20 languages, I speak 50 languages, whatever. But the thing is, you don't know what's inside their brains. You don't know their actual competence of the language. To be honest, a lot of people in this language learning space don't even know anything about how language works, like the nature of language, how acquisition works. Your brain is building this language learning this language model. Nobody truly knows, because we don't know everything about the brain. But this leads to all kinds of content, because people can just say whatever they want and we'll watch it. I mean, for example, Evil Dia, he makes these videos where he investigates these polyglots who claim to speak X amount of languages, and then he'll break it down and stuff. It's pretty entertaining to watch, honestly. But let's be honest, are you going to listen to advice from somebody who probably understands the language quite well, because he's been exposed to it and been listening to it for a long time? He's acquired quite a bit of language. His overall understanding of the language is pretty good, although maybe he doesn't speak as well. Like me, for example, with Japanese, I barely speak, and therefore my speaking sucks, like honestly. You can watch a video that I made a while ago though. Or are you going to listen to some advice of somebody on the internet who speaks a language, he speaks a lot, but you don't necessarily know what's inside his brain? Does he truly know this language? Like, does he understand the language? Has he internalized it? Probably most people are going to choose person B, because he speaks X language or X languages, and therefore he knows more about the language. So if speaking as a goal doesn't really work, and even if it did, speaking doesn't necessarily mean competence, then what should the goal be? And it's actually very simple. I think there shouldn't be a goal at all. I mean, like I said, babies don't have a goal, right? No, but honestly, what is the goal of language, right? It's to communicate a message. The fact is that you can communicate a message with perfect speaking abilities or without them. You can have a whole understanding of the language, know perfectly how it works and say something. Or maybe you don't know anything about the language, but you know this phrase, you can say it, and it will convey the same meaning, right, inside that language. As long as the meaning that the language contains is conveyed. That's what matters, the meaning behind the language, inside the language. And actually, when you focus on the meaning and not on the language itself, then the language will be acquired as a byproduct. At least that is what the research says about ALG, right? And if your goal is, let's say, near native ability, then your goal should be to create this language model inside your brain so that whatever input you're exposed to, you will understand at least 99% of it, like a native speaker. Speaking has nothing to do with that. It comes afterwards if you want to practice that. Again, I think this makes a lot of sense, this whole natural learning approach, this ALG, right? It actually really piqued my interest, so I got my hands on this book right here. This is basically the method. ALG explained how it was actually used in a classroom. And so I want to read a small section. Let's look at what attention on the meaning and attention on the language mean when each is applied separately to understanding and speaking. It's not hard to see how you can understand without focusing attention on the language, since you can get part of the meaning through non-linguistic channels, such as props and actions. However, can you say something with your attention only on the meaning and not on the language? It would seem that this can only happen if you think of a meaning and the sentence spontaneously appears, as it does when you speak your native language. But for this, you must already know the language, or at least enough to generate a particular sentence. From where does this speaking knowledge come? It is our opinion that understanding builds the neural machinery that turns the sentence we hear into meanings that we understand. And once the necessary part of this machinery has been built, it can work in reverse to turn meanings that we think into sentences that we speak. Gresham would say we acquire language by understanding input, and then speech emerges. Again, to me this makes total sense, and I really recommend that you read this book, The Listening Approach. So I guess to summarize, if you go online right now and look up how to learn X language, you'll find probably a bunch of people speaking X language, which is not necessarily proof of competence. And even if he is competent, he probably doesn't know the actual process, the acquisition of the language that got him to that point. And I think in order to fix these problems, we have to change what it means to learn a language. What is language, the nature of language, and how does acquisition work? Actually, I've been into that topic, the nature of language. And it basically explains how language does not exist. Not outside of your brain, at least. It's something that your brain creates. It's a mental representation. It's abstract and complex, and it can only be learned by yourself. Nobody can teach language. So what Bill van Patten also says is that we have to get rid of this whole teaching idea. You don't teach language, that it simply doesn't exist. You can only learn it by yourself. It's an implicit process. I think the branding of language and language acquisition is just bad. So I hope I can make a difference by making this video, I guess. Let me know what you think. How can we change the definition of language and language acquisition? Let me know what you think, and also I really recommend that you read this book. All right.